The post office was already closed when Ethan Ward stepped inside, the old wooden door creaking behind him like it had been holding its breath all day. The lights flickered in soft yellow cones, catching dust that floated lazily in the air, turning the quiet room into something that felt half forgotten, half sacred. Ethan wasn't here for a package, or a bill, or anything ordinary. He was here because of a feeling, a pull he couldn't shake since morning, like invisible fingers tugging him toward his P.O. box. The hallway felt colder than usual. His footsteps echoed too loudly. Everything was still, except his heartbeat. It thudded in his ears with the kind of rhythm a man hears before life changes. When he unlocked his box, there was only one thing inside, an envelope so thin it almost sagged in the middle. No return address, no stamp marking where it came from, just his full name written in a handwriting he hadn't seen since he was 4 years old. He froze. His hands turned numb. Because the name written in that familiar looping script was the name of his mother. A woman buried more than 20 years ago. For a long moment, Ethan didn't breathe. He couldn't. His eyes stayed locked on the handwriting as if looking away would break whatever impossible spell had settled over him. He touched the envelope with the back of his fingers first, the way someone might test a flame before committing their hand to it. The paper was cold, softer than it should have been, almost fragile, like it had been carried through time instead of through the mail. His throat tightened. He remembered flashes, his mother's voice humming while brushing his hair, the soft lavender scent she carried, the way she used to write little notes and hide them in his toy box. Notes with the same looping, careful handwriting. Notes he thought he'd forgotten until now. He swallowed hard and checked the room again, suddenly convinced someone was watching. But there was nothing except silence, the kind of silence that presses on your ribs. Ethan's fingers shook as he slid the envelope into his jacket. He didn't open it. Not yet. Some instincts you listen to, and something deep in him whispered that whatever lived inside that envelope shouldn't be read under fluorescent lights. Ethan picked up the brass key, holding it between his fingers as if it might burn him. It wasn't smooth or modern. It was carved with small ridges, uneven marks, and a faint engraving that looked like it had been scratched into the metal by hand. His pulse stumbled. Keys meant doors, doors meant secrets, and secrets, especially in his life, were never small things. He turned it slowly, letting the metal catch the dim glow of the streetlights outside his windshield. Something about it felt familiar, though he couldn't place why. Maybe it was the weight. Maybe it was the chill that ran through him the moment he touched it, like the key had been waiting for him. Waiting for years. He looked back at the envelope, the flap now lifted, the paper inside peeking out like it was holding its breath too. For a moment he imagined throwing it all away, key, envelope, letter, tossing them into the glove compartment and pretending none of this existed. But that was a lie he couldn't live in anymore. His whole life had been built on unanswered questions, and now, for the first time, one of them might be offering an answer. He pulled the letter out carefully, the paper softer than he expected, worn like someone had folded and unfolded it 100 times before sending it. His eyes drifted over the first words, and everything inside him went still. "My Ethan, I'm sorry." His heart lurched. He read the sentence again, slower this time. That handwriting wasn't just familiar, it was identical. The same curves in the E, the same slant in the T, the same soft, almost shy pressure of the pen. His mother hadn't just written him letters as a child, she'd written them like she was leaving pieces of her heart behind for him to find, and now he was holding one that shouldn't exist. His breath fogged the glass as he leaned back, the words blurring before he forced himself to read on. "I never meant for you to grow up alone. I never meant for you to believe I died that night. The truth is not what they told you, not what they let you think." Ethan's grip tightened, his jaw clenched. The world felt suddenly too small. He kept reading, each line tightening a knot he didn't know was still inside him. "I have watched you from far away, not closely enough to touch your life, but close enough to protect it when I could." Ethan blinked hard, vision stinging. Protect it? From what? From who? What happened the night they said I died was not an accident. It was not fate. It was not your fault. His breath hitched. He had spent years, decades burying the quiet, guilty belief that something about that night must have been tied to him. He'd been too young to understand, but kids always think everything is about them. If you are reading this, it means the danger has changed, and you must be careful. Do not trust those who claim to know what happened. They don't. I never died, and neither did your father. The last sentence struck him like a physical blow. He pressed the paper against his chest, lungs refusing to work. His father. The man who vanished the same night his mother died. The man everyone whispered about, but no one explained. Alive. Ethan dropped the letter onto the passenger seat and pressed his palms over his eyes. A low, shaking sound escaped his throat before he could stop it. This wasn't closure. This wasn't healing. This was the ground opening beneath him. 22 years of silence cracking apart. 22 years of imagining ghosts. And now suddenly, there were no ghosts, only people. Real, breathing people who had stayed hidden while he wandered through life believing he had no one. He grabbed the key again, turning it over until he spotted the engraving he'd missed earlier. Tiny coordinates, worn but readable. His mother didn't just want him to know she was alive, she wanted him to find something. Maybe her, maybe the truth, maybe the reason everyone lied. Ethan stared through the windshield toward the dark horizon. The night felt heavier, like it carried a message of its own. Whatever waited at those coordinates, it wasn't going to be simple. But for the first time in his life, he had a direction. And that was enough to make him start the engine. Ethan drove out of town with the letter still open beside him, the words hovering in his mind like smoke he couldn't clear. The night highway stretched ahead in a long silver ribbon, empty except for his headlights sweeping over guardrails and patches of frost. He gripped the steering wheel with both hands, forcing himself to breathe in steady pulls. Every mile he put between himself and town felt like a mile away from the life he thought he understood. The coordinates carved into the brass key were etched now into his memory, almost humming inside him. But beneath that strange, urgent pull was something softer, something frightening in its own way, the feeling of being wanted, not abandoned, not forgotten. Wanted enough that someone had watched over him for years without showing their face, someone who claimed to be his mother, someone who insisted his father was still alive. He whispered the words aloud again, needing to hear them in his own voice. Neither did your father. The sound of it made him grip the wheel harder. It didn't feel real. Not yet. When he reached the first stretch of forest road, the air turned colder, sharper, like the world was warning him everything ahead was different from everything behind. He slowed the truck, letting the tires crunch over the gravel path winding through the pines. The branches leaned inward, making a tunnel of shadows that swallowed the moonlight. Ethan's breath fogged the cab again as he checked the dashboard clock. It was nearly midnight. He should have been tired, but something kept him awake, an electric pressure under his ribs, pulsing with each heartbeat. He kept glancing at the key on the passenger seat, shiny against the dark cab. The metal seemed to glow faintly every time his headlights caught it, and then, just as he rounded a bend, his high beam swept across something that made him lift his foot off the gas. A figure standing beside the tree line, half hidden, unmoving. Ethan's heart lurched so violently it made his shoulders tense. He blinked, leaned forward, looked again. The figure didn't run, didn't wave, didn't step into the road, just stood there with a posture too still, too deliberate, as if waiting for the exact moment Ethan would pass. The same unsettling sense washed over him, the one he'd felt outside his apartment weeks ago, the one he'd tried so hard to ignore. Someone was watching him, had been watching him longer than he realized. He pressed the accelerator to keep moving, but his hands were slick with sweat. He kept his eyes on the rearview mirror until the trees swallowed the figure completely. His pulse hammered in his ears. Whoever that was, they didn't look lost. They looked like someone checking progress, someone following a trail, his trail. The forest deepened as he drove farther in, the path narrowing until branches scraped the sides of the truck like skeletal fingers dragging across metal. The coordinates indicated he was getting close. He could feel it. The air itself felt charged, like a place holding too many secrets under its bark and soil. When he finally reached a clearing, he stopped the truck and stepped out, boots sinking into soft, frost-covered ground. The forest was silent. No wind, no animals, not even the whisper of branches. Ethan felt the envelope in his jacket pocket like a heartbeat. The letter. the key, the truth. All of it had led him here. He raised the key toward his flashlight beam and scanned the clearing until he saw it. An old wooden post, half buried in leaves, with a rusted padlock hanging from a metal ring. The kind of lock that hadn't been touched in years. The kind of lock that waited for a key carved long before Ethan was old enough to read. He swallowed hard and stepped toward it, every instinct torn between fear and something far more dangerous, hope. Ethan crouched beside the wooden post, his breath fogging in slow, unsteady clouds as he brushed away the leaves gathered around the base. The padlock was thick with rust, its metal flaking beneath his thumb, but the ring it hung from was solid, almost too solid for something that looked this old. He lifted the brass key and felt a cold twitch run through his spine. It slid into the lock with a soft metallic sigh, like it had been waiting for exactly this moment, this person, this night. The click that followed was quiet, but it echoed through the clearing in a way that made the hairs on his arms rise. When the lock dropped into his palm, the wooden post shifted, groaning as if waking from a long sleep. Ethan stepped back as a hidden panel creaked open at the base, revealing a small, dark compartment lined with rotted cloth. Inside was a metal box, about the size of a shoebox, covered in dust, thick enough to dull its edges. His pulse quickened. This wasn't a random place. Someone had put this here with purpose, someone who expected him to find it. He pulled the box free, the cold metal biting into his fingertips, and carried it toward the truck where the headlights cast a pale, trembling light across the clearing. Kneeling beside the front bumper, he set the box down gently, half expecting it to rattle or whisper or reveal something alive, but it sat silent, heavy, patient. He wiped the lid with his sleeve, exposing etched lines that formed a pattern, circles intersecting with straight bars, like a map without labels. The latch wasn't locked, just stuck. He pried it open with his fingertips until it snapped loose, sending a sharp noise into the trees. Ethan flinched and looked around instinctively. The forest didn't move. Not even a twitch of wind. He opened the lid. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, some black and white, some faded color. All of him. Ethan at 10, walking home from school. Ethan at 16, sitting alone on a football field. Ethan at 18, boarding a bus out of his hometown. Photos taken from afar, photos he never posed for, photos no one should have had. His stomach twisted, a cold pressure curling under his ribs. He shuffled through the images with trembling hands. Every stage of his life, every lonely corner, every quiet moment, someone had been there watching. Not interfering, not approaching, just watching. A folded page lay beneath the stack, thin and yellow at the edges. He lifted it and recognized the handwriting immediately, his mother's again. Ethan, if you are reading this, it means I could not tell you the truth myself. I feared this day, but I also prayed you would find your way to it. He swallowed, eyes burning. Your father and I did not abandon you. We were forced to disappear, forced to leave you in the only place they wouldn't look. A chill rippled through him as he read on. You were not hidden from danger. You were the danger's leverage. His heartbeat stumbled. They watched you because of us, because we knew something we were never meant to uncover. And they will look for you again. You must move quickly. Ethan lowered the letter, breath shaking as the weight of those words settled like ice across his shoulders. He leaned back against the truck, the night pressing in around him as if listening. Every photograph, every scribbled line of his mother's handwriting crashed together in his mind like falling timber. His life wasn't an accident. His loneliness wasn't unlucky. He'd been living inside someone else's war without knowing it. And now, whatever that war was, it was reaching for him again. He folded the letter with careful, reverent fingers and placed it in his jacket. Then he shut the metal box and stood slowly, scanning the tree line. Something felt different, a shift in the air, a presence, the same feeling he'd sensed on the road. He wasn't alone out here, not anymore. Ethan reached inside the truck for his flashlight, gripping it tighter than he needed to. If you're here, he whispered into the dark, you're not watching anymore. You're following. The forest didn't answer, but the silence had changed. And Ethan knew whatever waited next was already moving toward him. Ethan closed the truck door quietly, the hollow thump rolling through the clearing like a warning he hadn't meant to send. He lifted the flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness in a narrow, trembling column. The trees absorbed the light instead of reflecting it, their bark wet with frost, their branches drooping like watching silhouettes. Every instinct he had, every one he'd learned growing up in unstable homes where danger could arrive without sound, told him something was close, too close. He stepped around the truck, boots sinking into the soft soil, and swept the beam across the ground. No footprints, no broken branches, no movement between the pines. But instinct wasn't fooled by what eyes could or couldn't see. Ethan felt it pressing against the back of his skull, the way an animal knows a predator is near before it appears. He tightened his grip on the flashlight, trying to steady his breathing. "Show yourself," he whispered, though he didn't know if he wanted an answer. The forest gave him none, only the steady throb of his own pulse in his ears. He walked toward the edge of the clearing, following the uneasy pull in his chest like a compass that knew something he didn't. Every step deepened the quiet. Even the faint hum of insects was gone. It was a silence that shouldn't exist, not in a mountain forest, not at midnight. He kept moving until the beam of his flashlight caught something pale on the ground. He crouched, heart racing. A small scrap of paper lay pinned beneath a smooth river stone. Ethan picked it up slowly, chest tightening as he recognized the handwriting. His mother again. "You're not alone tonight. Be careful who approaches first." His throat constricted. The note was newer than the others, less yellow, less worn. Someone had placed it here recently. Hours ago. Maybe minutes. He turned sharply, flashlight cutting through the dark as he backed up toward the truck. The message wasn't vague. It wasn't poetic. It was a warning written by someone who knew exactly what was happening in this forest. A sudden crack of a twig snapped through the night. Ethan's breath caught. He spun toward the sound, flashlight darting between the trees, its beam quivering with his pulse. For a split second, so fast he questioned it, he saw a shadow shift between the trunks, a tall shape slipping behind a pine. Not rushing, not panicked, moving like someone confident enough not to hide completely. Ethan took one step back, then another. His instinct screamed at him to run, but the same instinct whispered that turning his back would be the worst mistake he could make. The forest rustled again. Closer this time. Ethan felt his lungs tighten as he raised the flashlight higher. "Who's there?" His voice cracked on the edges. No answer. Just that same slow, deliberate movement, like someone pacing the line between being seen and staying hidden. Then, silence. Heavy. Waiting. Ethan reached for the truck door, never taking his eyes from the trees. His fingers brushed the handle, just as another sound cut through the clearing. Not a twig, not footsteps, a low, steady exhale, the kind made by someone trying to remain calm, someone close enough that Ethan should have seen them. His breath stuttered. He swept the flashlight in a wide arc, panic building, but the beam froze when it caught something metallic glinting behind a tree. A small reflection, silver, swinging slightly as though it had just been touched. He focused the light, and his stomach turned to stone. A dog tag hung from a broken branch attached to a thin chain. Fresh, untarnished. There was an engraving on the metal, the numbers and letters sharp, as if stamped weeks ago. Ethan stepped forward slowly, the world shrinking to the sound of his heartbeat. He reached out and flipped the tag over with his thumb. His father's initials stared back at him. The same name he had grown up whispering like a myth. The same name his mother claimed belonged to a man who never died. Ethan staggered back, gripping the tag so hard the chain cut into his palm. This wasn't a memory left behind. This wasn't something placed here decades ago. This was new, recent. His father, who had vanished before Ethan could form real memories of him, had been here, not long ago. Maybe he was still here. And that figure he'd seen on the road, the one watching him, the one who didn't run. Ethan's breath shook as he lifted the dog tag to the flashlight beam. It trembled in his grip. "Dad," he whispered, barely audible, but the forest heard it, and somewhere beyond the trees, something moved in response. Not threatening, not hiding, moving like someone who had waited far too long for their child to find the first clue. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, not fear, something far more complicated, hope, raw and dangerous. He stepped toward the sound, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't running from the shadows. He was following them, Ethan moved deeper into the trees, the dog tag clenched in his fist like a lifeline. Every breath he took felt sharp, thin, pulled through lungs that could barely keep up with the rush of adrenaline pounding through him. His flashlight beam bounced across trunks and brambles, catching glimpses of frost and bark, but never the thing he was certain was there. The forest no longer felt like a place. It felt like a threshold, something waiting for him to cross it, something ancient and patient. The air smelled of pine and cold metal, a scent that prickled at old buried memories he couldn't fully reach. He stepped slowly, boots pressing into the dirt with soft, deliberate cracks. "Dad," he whispered again, not calling out, not searching blindly, just releasing the word into the dark like a fragile offering. A shape shifted far ahead, a soft rhythm of footsteps, not running, not stalking, just guiding. Ethan straightened, his pulse thundering. Someone wanted him to follow. The trees opened into a narrow pathway he didn't remember seeing before, a corridor of branches forming a tunnel overhead. His flashlight swept forward, revealing faint disturbances in the ground. A shoe print half pressed into damp soil, another a few feet ahead. Fresh. Ethan felt the world tip under him, the truth forming with dangerous clarity. His father wasn't hiding from him. He was leading him. The path sloped downward, the smell of water growing stronger until Ethan emerged at the edge of a narrow creek. The moon shimmered on its surface, creating broken silver fragments that danced along the current. And there, on a smooth stone by the water, lay another note, folded once, weighted by a piece of river quartz. Ethan approached slowly, the creek's soft murmur masking the sound of his footsteps. His hands shook as he lifted the note, unfolding it with a reverence he didn't fully understand. This handwriting was different, sharper, firmer, masculine. "Ethan, if you found this, you're close. Don't stop." The creek bed narrowed into a small ravine, the banks rising on either side like the walls of a forgotten passage. The sound of flowing water echoed strangely here, as if the forest itself were breathing with him. Ethan climbed over a fallen log, slick with moss, and paused when a cold gust of wind rushed past him. Too sudden, too directional to be natural, it pushed against his shoulder like a hand urging him forward. He followed the wind's path, stepping carefully across stones, letting the creek lead him until he reached a clearing unlike the first. This one was circular, surrounded by birch trees whose white bark shimmered faintly under the moonlight. In the center sat a structure, a small wooden shelter with a slanted roof, nearly invisible beneath vines and debris. Not a cabin, not a shed. Something older, something built to hide, not to house. Ethan froze at the sight of it. The shape tugged at something deep inside him. A memory, a dream, a place he had seen only once in a flash of childhood he thought he had imagined. His mother's voice echoed faintly in the back of his mind. "If you're reading this, run before they find you too." His breath caught. The shelter wasn't a message. It was a crossroads. Whatever waited inside was either the truth he had been denied or the danger that had stolen his family. He stepped forward, each stride heavier than the last. The shelter's door was slightly open, a thin crack of darkness waiting for him. Ethan tightened his grip on the dog tag, feeling the engraved initials bite into his palm. He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges groaning like something waking after too long in silence. Inside, the air smelled of dust and pine sap. His flashlight beam swept across the space, papers pinned to walls, maps, photographs, and on the back wall, illuminated by a thin slit of moonlight, a single word carved deep into the wood. Ward. His last name, his family's name, fresh, recent, not carved by a stranger, carved by someone who wanted him to know exactly who had been here. Ethan stepped inside, heart pounding so hard it shook his ribcage. "Dad," he whispered again, this time not to the forest but to the room itself. Because for the first time, it didn't feel like he was following ghosts. It felt like he was standing in someone's footsteps, someone alive, someone close. And the truth waiting here was no longer something far away. It was breathing, it was watching, it was about to step out of the dark. Ethan moved deeper into the shelter, each step slow and deliberate, as though the floorboards themselves might react to him. The air inside felt thick, like it had been holding its breath for years, waiting for someone to finally open the door. His flashlight beam slid across the first wall, illuminating a series of maps marked with faded ink. Circles drawn around towns he'd lived in, lines connecting them, dates scribbled in the margins. His throat tightened. These weren't random. These were tracking points. Someone had followed his entire life, not from instinct or memory, but with intention, with precision. He swallowed hard and shifted the beam to the next wall. Photographs. More of him. More than were in the metal box. Ethan at grocery stores. Ethan fixing cars at the shop. Ethan sitting alone in diners. Every picture taken from a distance. Never close. Never touching his life. Only orbiting it, the way a protector might, or a predator. But the pictures didn't feel like threats. There was something almost gentle about them, as if the one taking them was afraid to get too close, afraid their presence might ruin something fragile. Ethan stepped closer, lifting one photo with careful fingers. He recognized the street, the place he used to rent, the windows, the rusted mailbox, and in the corner of the frame, a silhouette, a man, just a shape behind a tree, watching him. Ethan leaned in, heart hammering. Tall, broad shoulders, a familiar stance. His stomach twisted. He had seen this figure before. On the road, at the mechanic shop months ago, in the corner of his vision when he boarded the bus at 18. He hadn't imagined it. He hadn't been paranoid. Someone had been there all along, someone who knew him, someone who had once lifted him as a toddler, someone whose blood ran in his veins. Ethan's hand trembled as he lowered the photo. "Dad," he whispered, barely able to force the word out. It didn't echo. It just hung in the room, swallowed by the weight of what surrounded him. He turned toward the back wall, the one with his last name carved deep into the wood. The letters weren't rough or rushed. They were carved with patience, with care. Ethan lifted his fingers and brushed along the grooves, feeling the edges, the pressure marks, the long, slow cuts of someone who wasn't carving out of panic, someone carving out of longing. He closed his eyes as the realization washed over him. His father had been here recently. Hours ago, maybe. Days at most. Not years. Not decades. The wood still smelled of sap. The shavings still clung to the floor like tiny curls of paper-thin evidence. Ethan lowered his hand slowly, almost reverently, as if touching the carving again might collapse him. He stepped back and noticed something he hadn't before. A small wooden box sitting on a makeshift bench near the wall. It wasn't dusty like the others. It wasn't old. It was clean, polished, waiting. Ethan approached it with cautious steps, each one echoing quietly in the tight space. His fingers hesitated over the lid before finally lifting it. Inside was nothing complicated, just a single object lying on a piece of folded cloth. A compass. Old, but not broken. The metal ring around it was scratched, worn from years of use, but the needle inside was steady. It pointed north with unwavering certainty. Ethan lifted it gently, turning it in his palm. On the underside, faint but unmistakable, two initials were engraved. A.W. Adam Ward, his father. Ethan's lungs tightened. The compass wasn't a clue, it wasn't a relic. It was a breadcrumb left by a man who wanted his son to find him, a guide, a promise. A message that said, "You're close." And then, before Ethan could even take another breath, he felt it. A shift in the air behind him. Soft, subtle, human. Not the forest, not the building settling, not his imagination pulling at shadows. A presence, standing just outside the shelter's door. Ethan froze, every muscle locking tight. The flashlight beam shook in his hand, scattering across the papers and maps like frantic lightning. He didn't turn right away. He didn't dare. He just listened. The sound was unmistakable. A single, measured breath. Slow. Controlled. As though whoever stood there was trying not to startle him. Ethan's heart pounded so violently it felt like it was echoing off the walls. The compass in his palm vibrated slightly, the needle quivering as if reacting to the nearness of the one who once held it. Without thinking, Ethan whispered, voice trembling, "Dad?" A second breath came from the doorway, closer this time, then a faint shift of weight, a boot pressing softly into the dirt. Ethan finally turned his head slowly, flashlight rising with him. The beam caught the edge of the doorway, then a shadow, then the shape of a man standing just beyond the threshold. Broad shoulders, a familiar silhouette, a presence that felt both terrifying and heartbreakingly safe. Ethan's throat closed. The man lifted a hand, not reaching, not stepping in, just showing it, palm open, a gesture saying, "It's really me, don't be afraid." Ethan's chest tightened painfully as every part of his life, every unanswered question, every lonely night converged in the space between them. The man stepped forward into the beam of light, and Ethan saw his father's face. Ethan's breath vanished the moment the man stepped fully into the beam of the flashlight. His father didn't look like a ghost from memory. He didn't look like the faded, uncertain figure Ethan had pieced together over years of imagining what a missing man might look like. He was real, solid, weathered by time, but unmistakable. Lines carved deeply around the eyes, a faint scar crossing his left cheek. Hair streaked with grey but thick and untamed, like someone who'd spent too long living without mirrors. And those eyes, steady, dark, familiar in a way that hit Ethan like a punch to the chest. They held the same quiet intensity Ethan had seen in his own reflection for years. The same sadness, the same strength, the same question. Adam Ward didn't smile. He just stood there, breathing quietly, as though afraid any sudden movement might shatter the moment. Ethan felt his legs tremble. His fingers loosened around the compass. "Dad," he whispered again, the word coming out fragile, like it hadn't been spoken in more than 2 decades. Adam closed his eyes briefly, pain flickering across his face, before he opened them and answered in a voice low and worn. "Ethan, son, you found me." "Son, you..." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The silence pressed between them, not empty, not cold, but heavy with everything they'd lost and everything they didn't know how to say. Ethan didn't step forward. Adam didn't reach out. They stood like 2 survivors meeting at the edge of the same wound. Ethan's grip tightened on the flashlight, the beam shaking as the reality of the moment overwhelmed him. Anger surged first, sharp, hot, instinctive. "You were alive," Ethan said, the words cracking. "All this time, you were alive." Adam nodded slowly, eyes darkening with something like remorse. "I had to be." His voice trembled. "For you." Ethan shook his head hard, tears blurring the edges of the shelter. "For me, I grew up alone. I thought you died. I thought she died. I thought..." His voice broke. He pressed a hand to his forehead. "You let me believe everything was gone." Adam stepped forward but stopped before crossing the last 2 feet between them. "Ethan, if I had come back for you, they would have found you. They would have used you against us, against her." He swallowed, voice rough. "Your mother and I made the only choice we could, not the choice we wanted." Ethan's breath hitched. "She's alive too." Adam's eyes softened with a grief Ethan didn't recognize, grief that had lived in him for years. "She was, until recently." Ethan's stomach twisted. "Was?" Adam's gaze lowered to the compass still clenched in Ethan's hand. "She sent you that letter knowing time was running out. She wanted you to have the truth, even if she couldn't deliver it herself." The shelter seemed to tilt. Ethan braced a hand against the wall, his pulse pounding painfully. "What happened to her?" he whispered. Adam didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer to a small work table in the corner and picked up a folded map, his movements slow and heavy. "Everything changed the night we disappeared. The people we were investigating, they didn't just want to silence us. They wanted what we found, and they would have done anything to get it." He set the map down gently, as though afraid it might break. "Your mother stayed hidden for years, moved from town to town. She watched you whenever she could without drawing attention. She kept you safe from a distance." Adam's voice cracked for the first time. "I was supposed to meet her 3 weeks ago. She didn't come." Ethan felt his heart sink. He remembered the trembling handwriting in the letter, the warnings, the urgency. "You think they found her," he said quietly. Adam didn't nod, didn't speak, but the silence was answer enough. Ethan wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, trying to breathe through the storm inside him. He wanted to scream, to hit something, to demand why the truth was buried beneath decades of silence and shadows. But looking at Adam, at the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands shook despite trying to hide it, Ethan saw the truth. His father wasn't the villain of his loneliness. He was a man who had been running from a monster Ethan didn't yet understand. A man who had stayed alive on sheer instinct and love, twisted into survival. Ethan stepped forward, closing the distance by a single step. "Why now?" he asked. "Why all this?" Adam exhaled, a sound full of regret and warning. "Because they've found you too." The words cut through Ethan like a cold blade. Adam held his gaze, expression fierce in the dim light. "You weren't supposed to come this far. You weren't supposed to see this place. But once you opened that letter, once you took the key..." His voice hardened. "They knew you would follow it. They've been tracking movement in these woods. I've seen their signs." Ethan's stomach knotted. Every shadow he'd glimpsed, every moment he felt watched, every figure that vanished before he could be sure. They weren't all his father. Some were something else, something darker. Ethan tightened his jaw. "So what do we do now?" Adam finally stepped closer, placing a steady hand on the compass, his compass, still trembling in Ethan's grip. His voice dropped into something low, unshakable, forged from years of running and surviving. "Now, son, we run together." Adam's words hung in the cold air like a verdict. Heavy, final, impossible to ignore. "We run together." Ethan felt the weight of those words sink deep into his bones, settling in a place long hollowed out by years of silence. He didn't know what running meant anymore, not in this world of hidden shelters and coded notes and figures in the trees, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity: he wasn't running alone, not anymore. The realization steadied him in a strange, unexpected way. His breathing slowed, his heartbeat, still fierce, began to find a rhythm. Adam watched him quietly, eyes searching his face for something: fear, hesitation, maybe regret. But Ethan lifted his chin. "Tell me what we're up against," he said. "I need to know everything." Adam's jaw tightened. He nodded once, as though he'd been waiting years to hear those exact words. He turned toward the wall of maps and placed a hand against one of them, his fingers tracing a path marked in red ink. "It started before you were born," Adam said, his voice low and steady. "Your mother and I were undercover. We weren't just investigators, we were infiltrators, deep in a network that trafficked information, secrets, people. They used the foster system as a shield to move kids they wanted leverage over." Ethan felt his stomach twist as the implications hit him. Adam continued, "We found records, financial trails, names of officials involved, and we found something bigger, something that would have destroyed the entire operation if it had gotten out." He tapped a circle on the map, a location far from where they stood. "This was their hub, their stronghold, and the night we got close to exposing it, everything fell apart." Adam stepped back, rubbing a hand over his scarred jaw. "We had to disappear. There was no other choice. But disappearing came with a price." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, trying to absorb the avalanche of truth. "And the price was me," he said quietly. Adam turned sharply, pain flickering across his face. "No," he said. "The price was losing you. The price was watching you grow up from shadows because it was the only way to keep you alive." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but Adam lifted a hand, voice softening. "You were never the price. You were the purpose." The words hit Ethan harder than he expected, knocking the breath from him for a moment. He looked down at the compass, suddenly understanding why Adam had left it for him. A guide, a promise, a way to find him when the world said he didn't exist. Before Ethan could speak, a sharp, distant sound cut through the forest, quick, metallic, unmistakable, the click of a branch under weight, not an animal, not wind, a person. Adam's head snapped toward the doorway, his entire posture shifting from grief to instinct, from father to protector. "They're closer than I thought," he murmured. Ethan felt the air tighten. "How many?" Adam moved silently to the far wall, pushing aside a crate to reveal a narrow crawl space behind it. "3, maybe 4. They don't travel alone." Ethan felt a surge of heat, fear mixing with anger. "They followed me here." "No," Adam corrected, pulling open the hidden exit. "They followed the letter. They were waiting for you to seek answers. That's how this works. They don't chase, they herd." Ethan swallowed hard. the reality settling like cold ash in his chest. He stepped toward the crawl space, but Adam held up a hand. "Once we go through there," he said, "we don't come back. Everything in this room, everything you saw tonight, we leave it behind." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding. The photographs, the maps, the compass, the carved name. This shelter was a chapter. What came next was the war his father had been fighting alone. Ethan tightened his grip on the compass. "Then let's go." Adam gave a single nod, proud, pained, resolute, and motioned him inside. The passage was narrow, cold, barely wide enough for one person at a time. Roots clung to the earth walls. Gravel shifted beneath Ethan's boots. Behind them, the sounds in the woods grew louder, footsteps, radio static, low voices, too distant to decipher but close enough to chill the spine. Ethan crawled forward faster, heart thundering, breath tight, until he felt the air open up ahead. Adam caught up behind him, whispering sharply, "Don't stop!" Ethan pushed through the final stretch, debris brushing his shoulders, until he emerged into the night behind a cluster of thick cedars. The forest seemed to hold its breath again, watching, waiting. Adam slid out beside him and closed the hidden entrance with practiced ease. He checked the darkness behind them, listening with a stillness that came from years of staying alive when he shouldn't have. "This way," he whispered. Ethan followed as Adam moved swiftly through the trees, every step deliberate, quiet, urgent. The forest around them grew darker, thicker, pressing close on either side. But Ethan didn't look back, not at the shelter, not at the shadows, not at the ghosts of his old life. For the first time, he wasn't a boy abandoned by silence. He was a man stepping into the truth, with the one person whose absence had defined his entire world. And behind them, almost too faint to hear, the forest whispered with approaching footsteps. The hunt had begun, and Ethan Ward was no longer the one being herded. He was about to become the one who fought back. Branches whipped lightly against Ethan's jacket as he followed Adam deeper into the forest, their shadows crisscrossing like frantic brushstrokes over the ground. The night around them felt alive, breathing, shifting, aware. Every few steps, Adam paused, head tilted slightly, listening with a practiced instinct Ethan recognized not from memory, but from blood. The man moved like he'd spent half his life hunting, and the other half being hunted. Ethan tightened his grip on the compass, the cold metal steady in his palm. Ahead, Adam motioned for him to crouch, and they slid behind a fallen cedar trunk slick with moss. Adam held up a hand. "Wait," Ethan stilled, lungs barely expanding. The forest ahead flickered with faint movement, 3 silhouettes sweeping between trees, each carrying a faint glow of flashlights muted by cloth covers. Professional, quiet, coordinated. Adam leaned close enough that Ethan felt the warmth of his breath against his ear. "They're not scouts," he whispered. "They're retrieval." Ethan's pulse thudded painfully. "Retrieval for what?" Adam's jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the approaching shadows. "Not what. Who?" Ethan swallowed, nausea curling in his gut. Adam continued, voice razor-soft. "They don't kill their leverage. They collect it." Ethan stiffened as the implication settled. He wasn't being hunted for information. He was the information, a piece on a board he didn't understand. Adam placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, pressing him lower. "They took children for decades, kids with parents who knew too much. Kids like you." Ethan's voice cracked even in a whisper. "Why me? Why now?" Adam's eyes flashed with something fierce, protective fury. "Because you're the only loose thread left." The silhouettes paused. One lifted a hand, signaling something Ethan couldn't see. Another knelt and touched the ground, right where Ethan and Adam had passed minutes before. A tracker, following their footprints as easily as following a red line on a map. Ethan held his breath until it hurt. Adam's grip tightened. "We can't outrun them if they track by ground," he whispered. "We need higher terrain." Without another word, he motioned to the left, guiding Ethan along a slope nearly hidden by thick underbrush. The climb was steep, mud-slick beneath their boots, but Adam moved with frightening efficiency. Ethan followed, hands gripping roots and branches as they scrambled upward. Below them, faint beams of light swept the slope. They were gaining. Halfway up, Ethan's foot slipped on a patch of wet moss, sliding several inches before Adam's hand shot back and seized his forearm in a grip of iron. "Easy," Adam breathed. "They hear rocks." Ethan steadied himself, chest heaving silently, and they resumed the climb. At the top of the ridge, the forest opened into a wide stretch of rocky highland lit faintly by moonlight. Adam pressed a palm to Ethan's chest. "Stop." Ethan listened. The forest below rustled with the soft, unmistakable rhythm of coordinated footsteps. But up here, nothing. No wind. No birds. No sound at all. Adam scanned the area, eyes sharp. "We have two options," he murmured. "North, toward the ridgeline, or—" He turned his gaze west, toward a darker, denser section of woods. "Toward the old fire road. It leads somewhere safer." Ethan squared his jaw. "Where?" Adam met his eyes. "To someone who can help us." Ethan felt a flicker of disbelief. "Someone who knew all this?" "Someone who survived it," Adam corrected. Before Ethan could ask more, a sudden crack rang out, sharp, close, unmistakable. A breaking branch. Both men spun. One of the retrieval agents had reached the ridgeline. His flashlight beam sliced through the trees, landing dangerously close to where they crouched. "Move!" Adam hissed, gripping Ethan's arm. They sprinted across the rocky terrain, boots slamming against stone, the night exploding around them with shouts. "North Ridge!" a voice barked from below. "Two signatures! Moving fast!" Ethan's pulse roared. He followed Adam as they darted between boulders, breath tearing through his chest. Then Ethan's foot caught on a jagged rock. He stumbled. The compass flew from his hand, skittering across the ground. "No!" Ethan dove after it, scrambling across the stone. Adam grabbed his collar, dragging him back behind a boulder just as a flashlight beam swept past where Ethan had been seconds before. Ethan clutched the compass tightly, chest heaving. "I can't lose this," he whispered. Adam looked at him, really looked, eyes soft, despite the chaos. "You won't," he said. "Not again." For a heartbeat, Ethan felt anchored, grounded, seen. Then Adam glanced at the terrain and cursed under his breath. Voices were closing in from both sides. "We split," Adam said. Voice low, urgent. Ethan's face drained. "No." "It's the only way," Adam insisted. "They can't take you if they don't know which trail to follow. I'll draw them off. You head west, follow the fire road until you see a makeshift cabin covered in tin sheets. A woman named Mara lives there. Tell her who you are." Ethan shook his head fiercely. "I'm not leaving you." Adam grabbed his shoulders, grip fierce. "Ethan, listen to me. I'm not losing you again. But if we stay together, I lose you tonight." Ethan's eyes stung. "You just got back." Adam's face broke, just for a second. "I know." Then he forced the pain down like a man who'd been doing it for 20 years. "But I'd rather you hate me and live than stay with me and get taken." Footsteps thundered closer. Voices, flashlights climbing the ridge. Adam stepped back, eyes locked on Ethan. "Go." Ethan hesitated. One breath, one heartbeat, one impossible moment. Then Adam did something Ethan would never forget. He lifted a hand and briefly touched the side of his son's face. A father's touch, clumsy and trembling from years of absence. "Run, son." Ethan blinked hard, breath shattering, then turned and bolted into the darkness. Behind him, Adam ran the opposite direction, straight toward the danger, drawing them away. Flashlights chased him, shouts erupted, but Ethan didn't look back. Not yet. Not until the trees swallowed him whole and the ridgeline faded behind him. Only then did he hear it, the distant crack of a struggle, and one voice shouting in the dark. Adam's voice. Ethan froze, turned. Breath held. The forest around him pulsed with fear. Then, silence. Heavy, paralyzing. Ethan's heart twisted violently. His father had sacrificed himself to give him a chance, and now Ethan had to make the hardest choice of his life. Turn back for the man he just found, or trust the man's last words and run toward a stranger who might hold the truth. Ethan tightened his grip on the compass, and he ran. Ethan ran until his lungs felt like they were tearing open, until the cold night air scraped against the inside of his chest like shattered glass. Branches slapped across his arms, roots clawed at his boots, but he didn't stop, not once. because stopping meant the retrieval team would collapse around him like wolves. Stopping meant Adam's sacrifice would be for nothing. Stopping meant the compass in his hand would become just a piece of metal instead of the promise it was meant to be. So he kept running west, following the faint outline of the fire road as it wove through the dense forest like a forgotten scar. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Every distant echo felt like footsteps. Every gust of wind felt like breath on his neck. But gradually, the sounds of pursuit faded. The shouts dulled. The flashlights behind him dimmed and vanished. The night swallowed him, but at least it wasn't swallowing him whole. When he finally slowed, gasping, he pressed a hand against a tree and fought to keep from collapsing. Adam's voice kept replaying in his head, "Run, son." That voice, that moment, burned through him like fire. It wasn't just an instruction. It was a goodbye spoken by a man who had never been allowed to say one. The fire road narrowed into a winding path, and the moonlight glinted off something ahead, thin, broken reflections dancing like fractured stars. Tin sheets, just as Adam had said. Ethan forced himself to move, legs trembling, each step driven by sheer will rather than strength. The cabin appeared slowly, taking shape from the dark, small, crooked, almost swallowed by the forest. Its roof sagged beneath the weight of leaves. The walls leaned inward, and yet the glow of a faint lantern flickered behind the front window, warm and astonishingly alive. He stepped onto the porch, the wood groaning beneath his weight. Before he could knock, the door eased open 2 inches, and a woman's voice, steady, unpretentious but wary, cut through the night. "You Ward's boy?" Ethan froze. My father is Adam Ward." "Yes." The door opened fully. A woman in her 60s stood there, tall and sharp-eyed, silver hair tied behind her head. Her clothes were rugged, patched from years of use, but her presence, solid, unshaken, felt like it could stop a storm. "Get in," she said. "Quick!" Ethan stepped inside, and she closed the door behind him with a swift, decisive motion before swinging a heavy metal bar across it. Only then did she turn. "Name's Mara. I knew your parents before everything went to hell." Ethan swallowed hard, meeting her gaze. "He said you could help." Mara walked past him, grabbed a steaming kettle from a small stove, and poured water into a cup without asking if he wanted any. "I can," she said, "but not if you fall over first." Ethan's hands trembled as he accepted the cup. The warmth seeped into his palms, grounding him just enough to speak. "My father," he went back, to draw them off. Mara's face tightened, a shadow passing through her eyes. "That sounds like Adam. Stubborn as bad luck, brave as a fool." Ethan stepped forward. "We have to go back, we have to find him." Mara didn't answer right away. She stirred the stove, tossed a few logs inside, then sank into a chair. "Sit," she said, "and listen." Ethan hesitated, but his legs were near collapse, so he obeyed. Mara leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "Your father didn't send you here so you could run back into the teeth of the same beast he's been dodging for 20 years. He sent you because there's something he needs you to have." She reached beneath the table and pulled out a metal case, not large but heavy, far heavier than it should be. She set it in front of him. It looked old, military grade, locked with 2 clasps. "This," she said, "is why your parents vanished, and why those men are after you." Ethan stared at the case. "What is it?" Mara shook her head. "What's inside isn't my secret to tell, but it's big enough to burn cities to the ground, big enough to make governments pretend bodies never existed." She lowered her voice. "Your father brought this here 10 years ago, told me that when the time came I'd know who to hand it to." She looked at Ethan, at his exhausted face, at the compass he still clutched like a child's hand. "Tonight's the time." Ethan lifted the case and felt the weight of it sink into his arms like a second heartbeat. Something powerful lived inside it, something dangerous, something worth killing for. "Where do I take it?" he asked. Mara exhaled slowly. "There's a safe house in Crescent Valley. They specialize in people like your parents, whistleblowers, undercover ghosts, people who try to expose the wrong truth to the wrong crowd. They'll know what to do." Before Ethan could respond, a sound sliced through the cabin walls, a distant, muted gunshot. Ethan's blood froze. Mara stood immediately. That came from the ridge. Ethan bolted toward the door, but Mara grabbed his arm like a steel trap. "No! If you go back, you die. That was the point of him running the other way." Ethan's voice cracked, raw. "He's my father. And he gave you a choice," she said sharply. "Live with the truth, or die without it." Ethan shook out of her grip, pacing the room, mind spiraling. "I can't just leave him." Mara stepped closer, her voice roughening. "Look at me." Ethan forced himself to meet her eyes. "Your father is not a man who folds easily. If he's alive, he'll find a way back. And the only way you can help him, the only way, is to finish what he and your mother started." Ethan's breath shuddered. What if he doesn't make it? Mara placed a hand on his shoulder, firm, grounding. "Then you carry the fight forward. That's what children do for the parents who protected them." When dawn began to loosen the darkness behind him, Ethan didn't look back. He didn't need to. The story he'd been born into was no longer something hidden from him. It was something he was stepping into willingly. Eyes open, jaw set, heart burning. He had a destination. He had the truth in his hands. And somewhere out there, in the wounded silence of the forest, his father's voice still echoed, "Run, son, and don't stop." And Ethan didn't. He walked forward into the rising light. No longer the boy who grew up alone, but the man carrying the legacy of two ghosts who refused to die until the truth did.